Welcome to this edition of Rattling the Bars. I'm your host, Mansa Musa. Parole, also known as provisional release or supervised release, is a form of early release of a prisoner where the prisoner agrees to abide by certain behavioral codes of conduct, including checking in with their designated parole officer, or else they may be rearrested and returned to prison. This is what parole is in theory, but parole looks very different in practice, and I'm speaking from experience. How does a prisoner get parole? What are some of the barriers? Here to talk about the Maryland parole system is Shekhinah Braveheart from the Justice Policy Institute, who recently published a study entitled Safe at Home, Improving Maryland Parole Release Decision-Making. The report examines the Maryland parole system and how it decides to release or deny prisoners parole. Also joining me in the studio is Ms. Thomas Gaither, whose father is currently serving a parole-eligible life sentence and has been in prison for over 55 years. Thank you for joining me. So let's start with you, Tyra. How you doing today, first of all?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, and thank you for coming in here on short notice.
You're very welcome.
But let's talk about your father. Give us a little bit of information about your father before we go into his current state as it relates to parole.
My father is Thomas Gaither. He has been incarcerated since he was 19 years old. At the time he was incarcerated, I was barely 1 year old. I am now 54 years old, so that'll tell you how long he's been incarcerated. While he was incarcerated, he obtained his bachelor's degree in social sciences from Coppin University. He's had lots of programs where he's helped inmates learn how to read. He helped inmates learn how to play musical instruments. He was a part of the Family Day organization, helping incarcerated people be able to see their children, at least once a year. Not behind the glass or not with a desktop separating them. So he's done a lot of, good things. And I'm really proud of my dad.
Okay, as you should be. Now, let's talk about his progression, because you mentioned some of the programmatics that he's been involved with. And full disclosure, me and Thomas Gaither was locked up together. He's commonly referred to by us as Tahaka. So me and Tahaka was locked up together and did a significant amount of time together prior to me getting out. But let's talk about, at one point, was your father in work release and pre-release and working on the street during the course of his incarceration?
Absolutely. My father made it all the way to pre-release, work release. He was at JPRU for a good amount of time, but he also rode on a truck. I believe it was through State Use Industries, where he delivered furniture from different state office buildings. He did that for a long time.
And the reason why he was sent back at, I think it was like 97 or 95, then Governor Glendening had sent everyone back serving life sentence after someone had killed
his girlfriend
while I was on pre-release. So he was sent back under them. So he wasn't sent back because he had violated any of the conditions of being in a lesser security institution?
Oh, no. He was sent back just basically due upon the fact that someone else did something that they shouldn't have done.
All right, so so right now, what's his status in terms of parole? Walk us through that as much as you know about where he at and how long he been waiting.
Basically, 2 years ago, he went up in front of the parole board and was told to come back in 2 years. Then recently, within the last, 6 months, he went back up. And they did grant him parole, but they told him that he needed to have a psychological evaluation. As far as I can tell, it's been taking about 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, to get a psychological evaluation.
Okay, and Shekhinah Braveheart. All right, now you heard Tyra outline her father's situation, and it's not uncommon because I went up for parole. I had postponed my parole hearing when they sent everybody back from camp. I had postponed mine all the way up until from 95 to 2015. And when I went up in 2015, the only thing they could say to me at that time was, don't get no more tickets. And the last ticket I had prior to that was like in 97. So, and then your report, you address, and for the audience, restate what the report is and the name of it.
Okay, the name of the report this is our new report, and it is Safe at Home, Improving Maryland's Parole Release Decision Making. And it's based on about 5 years. JPI researched and analyzed about 5 years worth of data about the Maryland Parole Commission. The data were collected, prepared, and shared by DPSCS. For those who don't know, that's the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. And also in developing the recommendations to address the findings, and the findings were not good, by the way. We reviewed latest research, we examined best parole practices in other states, and we talked to a lot of people like the young lady, the family members, individuals who have experienced Maryland parole firsthand, as well as attorneys who assist individuals applying for parole. So no, her story is not surprising, and it, sadly common. It is pretty much the norm. In theory, parole should, function as a system of incentives to help incarcerated people prepare for returning to their families,
right,
returning to community, and it should be a key component for successful reentry, a true successful reentry. But the study finds that, the system conditions people for hopelessness, for despair, because people look to the system for guidance on preparing for parole, and what they find is more confusion and these arbitrary decisions. She described all the things that her father accomplished. So instead of recognizing, how people have changed, they earned a diploma, a degree, did programming, contributed to the well-being of all the people around them, all these positive things, a person will get to a parole hearing, and all the commissioners want to focus on are, is the original offense.
Right. And
which in some cases were decades old, or an
right,
old, out-of-date risk assessment. So instead of parole being the release mechanism that it's meant to be, it actually clogs the exit, and it's a driver of mass incarceration as opposed to a mechanism for release.
And you said that
you were saying,
you said, okay.
Say that again.
Now you say that this study, y'all been doing this study for 5 years. Okay, so let's look at it
was based on 5 years worth of information.
Right, 5 years worth of information. But let's look at what has taken place in once the study come out, and what should have remedied this problem in and of itself. Because prior to, I think, a couple of years ago, we had successfully, under Walter Lomax's advocacy, had successfully got the parole taken out the hands of the governor.
That's
because
correct.
Ultimately, at some juncture, when, such as in your father's case, whenever they recommended for parole, it would be, the recommendation would have to be, if the parole board say yes, then it would have to go to the governor, and the governor would normally sit on it for like 2 or 3 years. But let's look at Braveheart. Let's examine the study, and juxtaposing against Mr. Thomas Gaither's case. Okay, because as his daughter said, she said that, all right, her father right now is being sent to Patuxent Institute. He's waiting to go to Patuxent Institute for psychological evaluation. Now, how, in y'all study, how do this play out in terms of when you look at what they have been accomplishing since they've been locked up? How do this play out in that regard? Do this take precedence over all the accomplishments that the individuals had, or is this just something that's utilized to validate why they should or shouldn't get parole?
Okay, well, by law, the MPC decisions are rendered based on a specific criteria, this required criteria. So, it's a number of things. It's, of course, like you said, the risk assessment, drug or alcohol evaluation, victim impact, compliance with a case plan, any progress they made while incarcerated, meeting those educational benchmarks, physical, mental, moral qualification. There's a whole list of things that is in the law. The problem is the law does not specify how MPC should weigh these factors.
Right.
Keep in mind that most commissioners are former law enforcement officers. So it's no surprise, when they use their discretion on how to consider these factors, they're going to weigh more on the offense than anything. And there's nothing in the law saying that they can't do that. So unfortunately, that is what's happening. And, I want to point this out too, now that you mentioned, that her father has been incarcerated for a really long time and you were incarcerated for a long time. Although that law was passed in 2021 that eliminated the need for the governor's approval for parole to people with life sentences, many people who were approved by parole are still incarcerated due to the objections of past governors.
Right.
So of like 215 people with life sentences that MPC did consider for parole since 2015, and that's out of like 523 total parole-eligible lifers, only 76 were granted parole. And then when you think about that 76, then there's that risk assessment problem where people are waiting 2-3 years because there's only like 1 or 2 clinicians for the entire state of Maryland. So it causes severe delays.
And Tyra, me and you were speaking off camera. You spoke about that in terms of as far as like this evaluation. Talk about what you came up later became aware of about the person that was down there that was doing the evaluation.
That there was a person that was doing the evaluations, actually saw my father twice and declined my father twice, but then they ended up being dismissed by the state of Maryland because they found out that he was incompetent.
Right. And that go back to your point, Braveheart, that most of the people that's involved in this process got a stake in maintaining the status quo. And to go back, I want to highlight something that you mentioned earlier about the criteria. Now, at one point when we went up for parole, when they gave you your decision was pretty much just like 3 lines. Denied parole, come back, get job training, right? And at one junction, it was a case, Terrence Johnson, and Terrence Johnson had 25 years. He had a celebrity case out of Prince George's County, and so they was keeping him locked up, no matter what he did. But at the end, when his attorneys filed a habeas corpus to have him released, they, as opposed to rule on the habeas corpus, they released him. But what came out of that was the a sheet that they use for criteria, and this here is the sheet that they use for when you go for parole. When they give you, and so going back to your point, Braveheart, and on this sheet it says it gives you everything like you should do, hearing recommendation, special conditions after release, sex offender treatment, administrative refusal. But in every category, it gives a reason why to justify them either giving you parole or denying you parole. That came out of the Code of Maryland regulations where the parole regulations are stating that you should be given a hearing and then what the hearing should consist of. But going to your report, I noticed that y'all was showing that in the report how a lot of times the hearings that was being given, all the mechanisms that's supposed to go into account to help a person get parole, y'all had seen where in most cases it was like a lot of arbitrary and capricious factors would be taken into account. Can you speak on those things?
Yes, there were a number of problems. People not really being adequately prepared because they don't receive the proper notification. in cases where they do receive notification, there's still no opportunity to prepare outside of a handful of organizations, volunteer organizations that go inside of prisons that help people to prepare for that interview process. Commissioners and those who hear, the parole hearing officers, they come in with a file, and I'm sure you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. They have everything in front of them. And they have some things in front of them. Sometimes people who are candidates for parole don't even know about. And they can just throw stuff at people. And the attorneys who have helped them, the individual who is applying for parole, has no way to refute anything that's erroneous, or, at least be prepared to answer those questions because it's not in the file. It's not visible to the actual potential parolee or the attorney. So that's deeply problematic. So there's that preparation issue. Even back to this risk assessment, there are concerns about that, amplifying racial and ethnic disparities because it's based on fixed benchmarks. Like, was there parental presence in your household growing up? How old were they when they got their first criminal offense? Things like that have nothing to do with the present. They're based on things that people cannot change. You can't change the way you were brought up. You can't change what happened when you were 14 years old and you stole that gum out the store and got arrested. You can't do anything about that. The only thing you could do is deal with the present and be the best person you can now. And that's why in our best practice recommendations, one of the first things that we talk about is the decision should be based solely on objective factors related to the person's, current state and their future risk to the community. It shouldn't be about anything else.
That's correct. Actually, my father's last risk assessment, the person concentrated on a suspension from school when he was 12 years old.
That's outrageous.
An interaction between him and the school principal.
And not only is it outrageous, but this the other part that they don't do, right? Now we got this study that come out of the Supreme Court about the state of mind of a youth. They already saying that a young person don't have the mental capacity to understand decision making at a certain age. As a result of that, the Supreme Court then came out and said that because a person don't have that informed intent, that they got to take into account that when they sentencing them or when they trying them. Now here we go. We got a judicial system, or we got a administrative system that says that as opposed to recognize that Thomas Gaither, Tahaka, as opposed to recognize that Tahaka has a BA degree, graduated from college, as opposed to recognize that Thomas Gaither had worked on the street, mind you, for a number of years, was in society, working on the street, paying taxes, albeit conditional, as opposed to recognize that he didn't violate none of the terms of that, as opposed to recognize that Mr. Gaither, Thomas Gaither, Tahaka, has been incarcerated 55 years, as opposed to recognize that he's an accomplished musician, can write, read, music, conduct, all that. As opposed to recognize, we're going to say that when he was 12 years old, that at the age of 12, he did something that a child did. Therefore, we're going to take that and let that supersede these factors that will go into making the informed decision as far as the criteria is concerned. Is he a safe risk to society? Yes, because he's been working in society. Do he have a social network? Yes, he has a family. Right. Is he qualified to return to society? Yes. Braveheart, talk about in y'all recommendations. Talk about some of the recommendations that addresses some of these draconian dispositions of the Maryland Parole Commission.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to go through some of these best practice recommendations, but first I want to highlight one of the things you just talked about that we also found in the report, and that is those individuals who served the most time. They served more of their sentence than most people. and they are over the age of 60. And, you know, the research says that, you know, crime is a young person's endeavor. You know, at age 40, the likelihood of reoffending drops. 50, it drops. 60, it's almost at like 0%. Like no one would reoffend. So her father wouldn't be, you know, a risk to society, to public safety. But according to our report, those are the people who are denied the most. They, I think they have like a 28% grant rate, which is lower than young adults at 37%. Middle age, like 31 to 35 years old, that's like 43. And once you get older, it drops. And that is the opposite of what the research tells us. The research tells us that those are the people that should be released. And those are exactly the people that MPC does not release. So among our best practice recommendations are, like I mentioned, making parole decisions based solely on objective factors, using race-neutral structured decision-making tool that incorporates a validated risk needs assessment tool, adopting more transparent parole procedures, and documenting the reasons for denial, and they should be appealable, really appealable. Now, you know, now they'll claim that it's appealable, but it really is not. And make it transparent. Right now, that form that you just showed, you know how they write one sentence at the bottom of why they deny. But it really doesn't give like a legitimate, clear reason why and something to back it up. Also establishing inclusive standards for parole board member eligibility. Like I said, currently most commissioners are former law enforcement or prosecutors.
And appointees.
And they're appointed by the governor. Yes. And supported by the legislature as well.
And Tyra, answer this question. Do you, first of all, how your father's health?
My father he's over 70 years old. You know,
oh my goodness.
He's got high blood pressure, and you know, he's had a couple of surgeries since he's been incarcerated. So, I mean, he has the health of a
70-year-old man. And they've been locked up 50-some-odd years.
That's right. I mean, he's sharp as a tack.
We already know
you
that.
know, sharp as a tack. He loves his family.
Let me ask you this here, because you spoke on your age when he was locked up, and this is a part that the parole board don't never take into account. What role did your entire life? What role did your father play in your life since he's been incarcerated?
My relationship with my father is solely. I give everything to my grandmother, because if I didn't have my grandmother being willing to come pick me up every weekend and take me to the Maryland State Penitentiary
that's right.
to see my father, then I would not have been blessed as I am to know my father. My father and I have never not had a relationship, but that is not common.
Right.
That is not common.
Right.
And the one thing that the state of Maryland does not take into consideration when they do this over incarceration, is that a lot of these men have children. And then what happens to the children? The children end up incarcerated too. If you're not going to examine the full picture, then you're doing an injustice to the public, because I don't know what type of person I would have turned out to be. I would not be the successful person that I am without the input of my father, without the family days, without the functions, without the visits on Sundays. But there are a lot of people that are in the same situation that I am that were not lucky enough. And my dad has lost his mother. My grandmother is gone, but thank God for my grandmother. There are so many other people out here, that women my age that are incarcerated right now because their mother was incarcerated or their father was incarcerated, and they did not have the opportunity to have that relationship. But I thank God every day for my grandmother, and for the fact that my mother wasn't the type of mother that said, you ain't going to see him, he ain't no good, blah, 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 blah. You know what I'm saying?
But let me ask you this here, and I'm going to get back to you, Braveheart. Do you feel as though your father can be and I know this is you would be biased otherwise, but do you feel as though, based on what your father has been doing since he's been incarcerated, and based on the person that you know him to be, you think your father would be a good candidate to be released from prison and be a asset to society as opposed to a detriment?
I think my father should have been released a long time ago. I think that even as an old man, he still has a lot to contribute. I have 2 grandsons, that would love to have their grandfather,
Right.
to be a part of their life. Even 70 years old, he's lived a lot longer than he has left.
Right.
But we want him home. We have a whole community. My father has friends that he left on the street that are looking forward for him to come home. My father has lost a lot of friends.
Right.
He has lost a lot of relatives, brothers.
Right.
His mother.
I know.
So, when you are a person that is incarcerated, that takes a lot out of you.
Right.
But at the same time, he has a strong family value. And we are right there with him, and we're going to fight. I'm not going to allow my father to die in prison.
Well, we know that.
So with whatever I have to do, we have to fight. But I just think that somebody needs to take a look at the full picture and know that when you incarcerate one person, let them be punished and let them do their time and then let them come home, because you've incarcerated a whole family. I have 2 brothers. I have one brother that unfortunately has been incarcerated, and I just know that, if my father had been there a little bit sooner, things would be a whole lot different.
Right.
I was a teenage mother. That wouldn't have never happened.
Right.
If my dad had been there,
And Braveheart, why when you looked at this, y'all did this study, and did any of these social factors come into play as she just outlined? Because this should be the genesis of everything. Was any of these things coming to play, like, cause I know they got the relationship with the community. They got a list of criteria, but it's self-evident based on what Tyra is saying. It's self-evident that these things are not taken into account, because right now Thomas Gaither is waiting on the part of the parole system that sends him somewhere to be evaluated for, and that's been going on forever. Then to have to wait another whatever amount of time for that decision to come back before they say, oh yeah, instead of going straight home, go over here in this program and progress your way out. So, but was any of these things from y'all study, did y'all see any of these things taken into account
Absolutely.
prior to y'all highlighting the fact that they weren't being looked at?
Yes, absolutely. Both things. We recognize that the destabilization of our communities, our Black communities, is due to mass incarceration.
Mm-hmm.
And the same public officials who would talk about, all this get tough on crime, like we only have a choice between mass incarceration and high crime, where, parole offers an alternatives that they haven't even considered. They should prioritize comprehensive parole reform to help people who've paid their debt to society return home. They're fully functioning members of society. They lead more effective, lives. Like she said, her father is a positive role model. I know, Mansa Musa, I know a lot of people. You probably know a lot of people. It increases public safety.
Mm-hmm.
We have higher levels of public safety because those same people come home as returning citizens and they dedicate their lives to being mentors and violence interrupters.
Right.
So we need them. So Tyra, yes, you need your father, but we need your father. Our communities need your father.
Right.
And, that's not what these, elected officials really think about when they, say tough on crime. More than 95% of people who go to prison are going to return back to the community. So we should be doing everything we can to, help them succeed when they come home and not unnecessarily prolong the process, because it's not healthy for us. And it's at a great expense, personal expense to the individual, to their families, to taxpayers. It's just expensive. It's a waste of money. And it's to no public safety benefit whatsoever.
And
Before I
go
forget,
ahead.
Tyra, I want to say that there's a medical geriatric parole bill for 2024. It's called compassionate release, and that covers geriatric parole and medical parole. And under the geriatric provision, people over 60 years of age would have a parole hearing automatically at 60, and it would be every 3 years. But it looks really promising this year. Then of course there's the medical component, which thank God your father doesn't need. But henceforth, if this bill passes in 2024 and goes into effect in October of 2024, people like your dad won't just be sitting there languishing with nonsense parole decisions like come back in 4 years, 5 years, 2 years, whatever, or wait for this risk assessment. It's based on their age, and if they have served at least 20, I'm not sure if it's 20 or 15 years inside. So it's long overdue. The number of parole eligible people over 60 has tripled since 2015. Tripled. So they make up 8% of the newly parole eligible population.
And Tyra, as we close out, what do you want to tell us about your father? And like I said, full disclosure, me and your father served time together. Me and your father was involved in a lot of activity together. So to say I'm biased, yes, I am, in regard to not only him, but the men that I served time with and the women that I knew that are still incarcerated. But what you want people to know about your father and how they can support your father's effort to expedite his release so he can be home with his family and give you a big hug.
I just want everybody to know my dad, he's a good person. He's a good man. He's strong. He's capable. He can do a whole lot more out here than he can in there. And he's got a lot of support, and he is not a person that anybody would ever have to worry about reoffending or doing anything like that. But the thing is that there's a big picture, and that I just hope everybody was sometimes, especially people in government, which take time to look at the big picture, because a lot of times people wonder what's going on in the street, why all these kids in trouble, why they doing that, doing this. Find out how the percentage of those children, how many of their fathers are incarcerated, how many of their mothers are incarcerated. That is a big part of the picture. If my dad couldn't take care of me, I had somebody that was out there that could, but all kids don't.
Okay.
So I think that we should concentrate on letting the people out that need to come out. Some people maybe do need to be there, but I think that the big picture is that you're only not dealing, when you're incarcerating this one person and you're keeping them for 55 years and they have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and, people out here that love them. It is just totally, it's a waste of money and it's a waste of time. So I just think that, in short, that it's time to think about what we're doing as a whole and not just only think halfway.
Okay. And Braveheart, what you got to say? What you got the last
I
word?
would concur with her that it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, but most of all, it's a tragic waste of human capital, valuable lives that contribute greatly to society, people who have wizened over time, who could contribute so much sitting there. I would encourage anybody who is listening to this, watching this, to connect with either, a grassroots advocacy organization or even, a larger national advocacy organization like the Justice Policy Institute, and come to Annapolis and tell your stories before these people who are making the laws, who may not have, the firsthand experience that you have. They don't know. And it's one thing for me to go there, for my colleagues to go there with all of our numbers and all of our statistics, but it's more impactful when you come and you marry that with the human experience, that this is what it looks like when you don't pass these laws. This is how it affects a human being. This is how it affects a family. This is how it affects an entire community. and this is how it affects society at large. No one is immune. No one is unaffected by this.
There you go.
Please come and encourage. Justicepolicy.org.
There you have it. The real news. Y'all rattled them bars today. And we want to focus on what Tyra said. We want to focus on the big picture. What is the big picture? You know, because we oftentimes hear about a lot of crime and a lot of things going on, but what is the big picture? This is the big picture. When the Unger case came out and I was released, this was the big picture. Prior to them releasing us, they said 250 murderers, rapists, and that was going to have a plague on the society. Since we've been released, only 2 people have returned back to prison that came out that Unger class. 2 people. What is the big picture? The big picture is that Thomas Gaither, Tahaka, was in society, working in society. Why is that not being taken into account if we're looking at the big picture? If we're looking at the big picture, we have a system that's broke. By the study, Justice Policy Institute showed us that it is safer at home, that the decision-making of the parole system is draconian and outdated, and we have to look at the big picture. What is the big picture? The big picture is Tyra Gaither sitting here asking us to support her father, but not only that, support all men and women that are incarcerated. And we ask you, as we close out, to continue to support Rattling the Bars and the Real News, because it's only from Rattling the Bars and the Real News that you're going to get this kind of conversation, that you're going to get a real conversation, a report, and then humanize the report by having a person whose family member is actually suffering as a result of the draconian parole policies that exist. But for Justice Policy Institute, we would not know these things. But for Tyra, we would not really be able to understand them in the human context. Thank y'all, and continue to support Rattling the Bar and the Real News.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work, so please tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.